One of the first things I did when Em and I moved into this house was build a root cellar. At the time, I was still farming commercially and operating the largest year-round CSA in Maine. A big reason I was able to successfully sell vegetables to my CSA members all year long was the preservation of storage crops. Since we moved into a house with a nearly finished basement, and I didn't have the money to dig a standalone root cellar, there weren't many options. I ended up throwing together this root cellar, which is really just a glorified closet in a section of the basement where the wall contains a window. That window is the key to regulating the temperature in the root cellar. I've monitored the temperatures inside the cellar with an external-internal thermometer. When, in the shoulder seasons of early fall and late spring, the air is warm during the day and cool at night, I open and close the window accordingly. However, in the dead of winter, when nighttime temps drop to sometimes 30 below zero, I keep that window shut most of the time, and even have to open the root cellar door to allow some of the house's heat into the space. This was a quick project that I threw together just to give me the space to store what I needed without much thought. But there's a lot to be desired in this root cellar. The door, for instance, isn't hinged. I need to slide it out and then move it to one side just to get into it. That hasn't bothered me so much, but it makes accessing the bounty within difficult for Emily or the kids who might want an apple for snack at school. Also, there's just way too much space inside this thing now that I'm only producing on the homestead scale. I'd like to have all that space back for other projects in the basement. So, I've decided to tear down the old model and build a new version that better fits our scale and lifestyle. I'm going to be reusing the materials from the original root cellar for this rebuild. This means I need to be careful in handling them and put some thought into how things will be trimmed down and reframed. For a couple of years when I began my commercial farming endeavor, I was also working another job. I happened to work for a modular home construction company. This was an incredibly educational experience. Nearly everything I know about building, I learned during that time. This rigid foam insulation is used around the foundations of houses in our climate. On more modern modular homes, it's also used to add another layer of insulation between the exterior wall and the siding on the home proper. It's very useful. But if you've ever cut this stuff, you know you need a very sharp knife. If you use a dull knife, you won't get a smooth cut. Instead, the blade will rip through the material and pull off little pieces. That's never good. But since I'm building this around the crops that I've already put away for the winter, I don't want those little pieces of extruded polystyrene all through my carrots and potatoes. That was as good an excuse as any to change my utility knife blade. Here's another useful trick I learned while working in home construction. If you've ever set a screw in the wrong place and it doesn't catch anything, it can be infuriating. Even more frustrating is the task of trying to take the screw out again when the threads aren't catching. If this happens to you, take a utility knife and slide it under the head of the screw, then set your gun in reverse and slowly back the screw out while applying pressure to the head with the blade until you've backed it far enough out for the threads to catch. I mentioned earlier that I need to be careful when considering how materials for a different size room can be reused for a smaller version. I often run into problems like this because of my inherent need to reuse perfectly good items and my general distaste for waste. One of the things I had to figure out for this project was how to get the doors to close tightly, yet open smoothly. I wanted to have some sort of door jamb to catch the door, and that could be used to install some sort of latching system, which I haven't dreamed up yet. Often on projects like this, time spent pausing and thinking is time well spent. Anytime you install a door, it's important to put spacers under the bottom edge while you're attaching the hinges. If you've ever installed a door without doing this, you'll know why. There probably isn't a building on Earth that is level and square enough to allow a door that is mounted flush with the floor to open without scraping. Using shims allows you to maintain a small gap between the door and the floor. Once you've installed the hinges, remove the shims, and the door should swing freely without interference from any high spots on the floor. In the case of this root cellar door, you'll notice that I'm using cedar shims on top of a spacer board. That spacer is a standard kiln-dried 2x4. I put this in temporarily because I'm going to put a pressure-treated 2x4 footer underneath the entire front wall and doors of the root cellar. Normally, I would have begun the project with this footer. However, the pressure-treated lumber I want to use is currently still tied up as the footer of my old wall. Since I'm reusing lumber from the old root cellar and taking it apart as I go, I just put the spacers in to ensure I could get the new piece installed once the wall is dismantled. Another option would have been to completely dismantle the old root cellar and then begin the new one. The reason I didn't do that is because I don't have anywhere to store all the materials while I'm building. If I'd done this project in the summer, I could have stored them right outside the basement door. But now it's winter and there's snow and high winds to consider, and I'm not interested in chasing pink foam board all over my property. One of the nice things about this rigid foam insulation board is that it's strong enough, at least across only 2 feet in width, to maintain its structure. This means I can save lumber by not framing in the edges of the door to add rigidity. This first door was a test case. Now that I've got that finished, the rest of the root cellar should come together with a lot more ease.